Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the University of Tasmania's Island of Ideas online public lecture series. As a reflection of our institution's recognition of the deep history and culture of this island, the University of Tasmania wishes to acknowledge the traditional owners of Lutruwita, Tasmania, the Palawa people. The Palawa are the original and traditional custodians of the land from which we are broadcasting to you live today, and we pay our respect to the elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their deep history of storytelling, knowledge sharing and caring for land. My name is Professor Gretta Pecl, and I'm the Director of the Centre for Marine Socioecology and a Professor of Climate Change at the Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies, or IMAS, both at the University of Tasmania. One of my main roles over the last 3 years has been as a lead author for IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And so the topic of discussion and debate tonight, the climate emergency, can your choices change our future, is something that is very near and dear to my heart. The seminar series, the Island of Ideas series, is an important part of university culture, hosting community events, connecting people and community and ideas, in particular when we were unable to host face-to-face events. Each year, the university presents hundreds of forums, seminars, workshops, all to nurture the ongoing learning of our students, alumni, and our broader community. Our Island of Ideas program continues today in the hope that we can connect ideas and people of Tasmania to a global network where we are able to collaborate and to discuss emerging ideas. As we navigate this very uncertain landscape of 2022, we hope that this series can be a small but positive outcome that has emerged from an otherwise tragic global pandemic. A few housekeeping notes before we begin though. Your microphone, camera and chat function and the raised hand function have all been disabled to protect your privacy. We do encourage you to ask questions though, and this can be done at any time by typing them into the Q&A function that you see at the bottom of your screen. You are able to ask questions anonymously if you wish, and we will address as many of those questions as possible live and later in the session, but you can ask questions at any stage. We'll also conduct a couple of opinion polls during this webinar. We would love to know who you are, where you're from, what you thought about the discussion, so please feel free to participate. And finally, this lecture is being recorded for later access onto YouTube and SoundCloud. So we'll provide details on where and when to find the recordings at the end of the session. Tonight, our topic is the climate emergency. Can your choices change our future? As I mentioned at the start, I'm Gretta Pecl. I'm a Professor of Marine Ecology at IMAS and the Director of the Centre for Marine Socioecology, and I'm delighted to host this session today. As a marine ecologist, I have seen firsthand the impacts of climate change on our natural systems, and my work is very deeply embedded in helping us pave the way to a more sustainable future. And the university is deeply committed to climate action and to sustainability in all its activities and operations. And if you have any questions about our initiatives or position on topics, a number of sustainability staff are also here and available this evening to answer any of your questions via the Q&A panel. In terms of climate change, there is no doubt that the need for aggressive climate action is clear and compelling. The latest IPCC reports that hopefully you've heard about in the news, there's been 3 reports come out in the last couple of months, all part of Assessment Report 6 from different working groups. The first one assessed the physical basis of climate change. The second report, the one that I was a lead author on, looked at impacts, adaptation and vulnerability. And the last report that just came out last week looked at mitigation of climate change. And collectively, those 3 reports assessed over 66,000 different scientific studies and very clearly demonstrated that human-induced climate change is causing dangerous and widespread disruptions in nature and affecting the lives of billions of people around the world. We are very clearly seeing increased frequency and severity of heat waves, droughts, floods. These weather events and extremes are occurring simultaneously, leading to cascading impacts, and accelerated action is required to adapt to climate change at the same time as making rapid and deep cuts in global greenhouse emissions. So far, progress on adaptation has been very uneven, and there is a massively increasing gap in terms of what we need to happen and the action that is happening. However, while this is pretty confronting, this is a challenge that we absolutely must embrace with a sense of hope rather than despair. We know that doom and gloom switches people off from thinking about the issue at all. And technically, a more sustainable more sustainable future where climate change is addressed is entirely feasible and possible. So that's what we need to move towards. But in terms of individual action, the problem is so big that it is reasonable to feel that at an individual level, we don't have power to change the current landscape. And I really hope that this session and our speakers today can help change that dialogue. Tonight, with our expert panel, we're going to explore the ways that you, as an individual, can make an impact on our mission to achieve net zero carbon emissions. Is it possible that you, the individual, can influence businesses and big decision makers to work towards our net zero emissions targets? So without further delay, I'd like to warmly welcome and introduce our speakers this evening. First up, we have Professor Martin Grimmer, our Associate Provost and Professor of Marketing from the University of Tasmania. We have best-selling author of The Good Life, permaculture expert and Gardening Australia's Tasmanian sweetheart, Hannah Maloney, and director. She's also director of Good Life Permaculture. And lastly, we have our industry champion, Martin Excell, Managing Director, Seafood Business for Ocean Stewardship and advisor at Austral Fisheries. So we'll start off with Professor Martin Grimmer. Martin, your specialisation makes you a kind of organisational psychologist, particularly concerning consumer behaviour. In your research, you do a lot of work on behaviours associated with pro-environmental and sustainable consumption. And I'm really intrigued and interested in what you've got to say, because I'm constantly fascinated with why people say they intend to do one thing and then do another. So I'm hoping you can share some of your insights, Martin. I'll hand over to you.
Look, thanks, Greta, and good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for coming along tonight. Greta has said I'm a consumer psychologist, and one of the areas that I've been looking at for quite some time is broadly what's called the field of ethical consumption, and then within the field of ethical consumption, I'm interested particularly in pro-environmental consumption. So what can you do, or what can people do if they're interested in consuming in such a way that it has a limited environmental impact? Now, I've come to a number of conclusions looking at this for some time now. The first conclusion is that the relationship between climate change and consumer behaviour is unsurprisingly a complex one. As Greta said, many consumers intend to buy environmentally friendly products, but don't actually do so. There's something that's referred to as the 30 to 3 syndrome, and without getting too fixated on the numbers, because these will vary whenever you do an opinion poll in terms of what part of the world you're in, what other issues are happening at the moment, and the like. But the principle is sound, that about a third of customers, a third of consumers say they're concerned about the environment and a firm's social responsibilities, but ethical products get about a 3% market share. So the 30 to 3 syndrome. We intend to do something, but we actually don't. And the other conclusion that I've got, having looked at this for a while, is that most consumers actually aren't capable of determining which behaviour changes are worth doing. So what should I actually focus on? So what I want to do is unpack that just very briefly. I'm going to start by just looking at a little bit of research I did with my excellent co-author, Tim Bingham, a few years ago, where we surveyed just under 700 people in Hobart, randomly selected from the electoral roll of Clark, what was Denizen at the time. And we asked them some questions about mobile phones, and particularly how likely they were to purchase a mobile phone from a company with either a low or a high level of environmental performance. We made these real companies with the real data we got from Greenpeace, so as to provide it with its level of authenticity. And unsurprisingly, as you can see from that graph, those phone companies that have a higher environmental performance, a lot more people said they would buy the phone from them than from a low performing company. And that's what you'd probably expect. If, however, we unpack that a bit, we start to begin to see some of the complexity of this issue. On the left-hand side, I'm going to talk very briefly about what is an individual or a personal hindrance, and on the right-hand side, a external or situational one. So if I look at the same data and I say, okay, let's see if it varies according to level of environmental consciousness, that is the extent to which someone is concerned about the environment. Again, unsurprisingly, what you see is that while the high-performing company still is more preferred, it makes a difference as to what the level of concern you have about the environment. If you're not concerned, there's a smaller difference. If you are concerned, there's a much bigger difference. So that's an individual characteristic that will affect how people respond. On the right-hand side is price. So we manipulated price to see what effect that would be. And you can see, again, that they're both still higher for the high-performing company, but the difference for high price is less than for low price. And here's where you get what's referred to as an ethical tipping point. At some point, if the price gets too expensive, consumers forego any ethical issue and go for a cheaper product because it just becomes too expensive for them. And that is the same, which we found from this research, for both high and low environmentally conscious consumers. They all reach an ethical tipping point. So let's unpack a few more of those particular issues. So personal, individual issues, as well as what I've said, an amount of the time is not knowing what to do. I don't know what products to buy. I don't know how to change my home. I don't know what to do. A common one, which Gretta referred to, is not believing that your behaviour will make a difference. That's referred to as self-efficacy. I don't feel that I'm just one person. How is that going to change anything? Another is a lack of urgency on the fact that climate change for some people can appear abstract, and that's referred to as something called construal level theory. We construe the urgency of an event based on how well we can understand it. And that also involves having to trade off long-term from short-term benefits. Long-term benefits is in a distant country called the future that is uncertain and ambiguous, whereas the present is much more tangible and easier to act on. We also have the issue of habit. People tend to do the same thing over and over and over. And also we have traditionally had a lack of faith in the performance of green products. Luckily, that's less so now, but that has certainly been an issue in the past. And external things, I won't go through all of these in detail, are things like price, lack of availability, lack of convenience, not easy to find, not enough time to search for environmentally friendly products, and also social influence. We've just conducted some research about the uptake of what's called so-called ethical food, and we found that one of the biggest things, in fact, the biggest thing that predicted whether someone sourced food ethically was whether they knew people who did as well and they respected the opinion of those people. That was a very big influence. Now, what do we do? Now, obviously, what we need to do is make the climate-friendly behaviour the easy one to do. So essentially, as a consumer, you can reduce your carbon footprint by reducing the consumption that is particularly taxing on the climate. So we need to make known and encourage change in the most climate impactful behaviours. For example, air travel for leisure in particular, eating meat from ruminants. And that's not just the methane produced, that's also the impact of the land use to create the meat from ruminants. Poor weatherization of dwellings, particularly with regard to heating and cooling, makes a big difference. Low versus high efficiency appliances. Those four things are the likely ones that will have most impact, and then you replace it with something else. The other thing that I've found from some research I've done is emphasising personal benefit. People, either low or high environmentally conscious people, are still more influenced by saying, well, here's how you will benefit personally from this behaviour versus just this, it will help the environment. People are, sadly, self-interested. And if you can cue into that, you get much more effort. And then the other thing, linking to what Gretta said as well, is linking collective action with tangible positive outcomes. You may be one person, but all people doing what they can and where they can will actually make a difference. So my final slide, these are some areas of focus for behaviour change. Lifestyle changes are something that people could consider doing. Now, not necessarily going as far as the full voluntary simplicity, but certainly looking at specific things. So how do I choose climate-friendly food? We need to have guidelines developed. We need to have a uniform national approach to that. So we have proper carbon labelling for products. Reduction in certain things, reduction particularly in or alteration in necessities and waste can actually be quite easy. So reduction, alteration in necessities like electricity, we all need electricity, but at the same time, we're all economically motivated to save money on electricity. So that's kind of an easy bit in some respects. Reduction in waste, no one would disagree with reducing waste. It's always a good plan. Reduction in luxuries, think about the air travel that you're doing. And then can you substitute what products you're choosing with a less carbon intensive product, and can you adopt new products such as energy efficient appliances and the like. So there's some thoughts from me about the consumer behaviour point of view, but to the question, can your choices change our future? I would emphatically say yes, they can. Thank you, Gretta.
Right, thank you, Martin. There's certainly lots of food for thought there, and I have lots of questions, and I'm sure others do too. So just as a reminder, don't forget to pop your questions in the Q&A box there. And I'd like to now welcome Hannah to the virtual stage. So Hannah, in your book, The Good Life, you discuss how living the ordinary life can make an extraordinary contribution to countering the climate emergency. So what are your thoughts on how individuals and their households can make a difference? Thank you.
Thanks, Gretta. Yeah, absolutely. And carrying on from a lot of what Martin said, actually, thanks for that, Martin, is when it comes to individual actions, there's a huge amount we can do. We have a lot of control over our lives, and so that we can really exploit that power that we have there. And so things like reducing flying, and eating meat consumption, retrofitting our houses, and choosing energy efficient appliances are all really good. And I think the overarching umbrella there is to reduce consumption across everything. We have an incredibly rich lifestyle in Australia and Western countries, and we consume more than we need. And there's a very well-oiled marketing machine behind that, making sure we keep wanting to consume. So we do have to understand there's a bit of psychology at work there as well. But I think reducing consumption is number one. And when it comes to retrofitting houses, obviously in cool temperate Tasmania, we have a lot of uninsulated houses and poor heating. And so that's a really easy, low hanging fruit, if you like, that we can address there. Dr. Saul Griffith has written quite a lot of books and lots of great resources online around how we need to electrify everything in our home. So moving away from gas in particular, and choosing electric appliances can have a huge impact. Of course, food choices, like when we think about consumer choices that we do make, thinking about where food is coming from. You can grow some of your food, obviously, as well. Composting, so we're keeping food waste out of landfill, all these really hands-on, tangible things that we can do as individuals add up to a collective movement and can have big impact there. Things like clothes, there's a fast fashion movement which produces a huge amount of waste on every bit of its production chain. So not buying so much again, but also choosing secondhand or choosing quality things that can last for longer. And that's not just for clothes, but for everything that we do need. And for those of us that in a more privileged situation, that we have more capacity to think about these things and to act on these things, we have more responsibility to then help others who have, for really valid reasons, don't have that capacity or time or additional money to buy that extra organic food or whatever that might be. And we can help in different ways, whether that's with our time, with our surplus cash, with our skills and knowledge, but we do have a responsibility to think about others besides ourselves. And just on the individual action, like I think people probably have heard about the carbon footprint and, what's your carbon footprint, and work it out and reduce it. And a lot of people don't know that was actually developed by BP, so British Petroleum, back in the early 2000s. It's one of the most clever marketing campaigns ever to kind of put the responsibility back on the consumer, going, oh, climate change is actually your problem. You have to fix this. And, you know, we all have a role to play, absolutely. But really, as, you know, as citizens, we go, actually, massive industry responsible for huge amounts of climate chaos. You have a big responsibility. And as individuals, we can remind them that collectively all the time with how we spend our money, where we divest our money. So which bank, which future funds, superannuation funds, where you're putting your money, making sure they don't invest in fossil fuels. That's a huge thing, huge power we can do as individuals. And when we think about systemic change, which individuals play a role in, we can think about our upcoming federal election in Australia, voting for climate safe policies there. That does matter, and really reclaiming our democracy and saying this is what we want and what we need for ecosystem and human health is such an incredible thing to be able to do. So I really hope people harness that power. And I really think in terms of systemic change, money is a big one. I mentioned divesting, and also really importantly, listening to and centering First Nations voices in the climate conversation. First Nations communities are often frontline communities of receiving the big impacts of climate chaos. And so we need to listen to frontline communities, full stop, and we need to listen to First Nation communities about their perspectives of what's happening, why it's happening. It's happening because of colonisation. And so we need to really start to unpack those really huge, complex issues and walk together into the future, pathways of healing, climate justice. And to answer your question, Gretta, can our choices help create a climate safe future? I think they're the only thing that's going to do it. So I really encourage all of us to remember how powerful we are and to have a crack at just creating the future of our dreams, because it is there for us to create it. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. I like that last point. Remember how powerful we all are. So on that note, we'll move on to Martin Excell, and then we'll join together again for some discussion. And there are some questions coming through that look very interesting. So please continue to add those as the next Martin talks. So Martin, you've been a mover and a shaker in the seafood sector for 40 or so years, although it doesn't look like it. And you were working for Austral when they were the first movers working towards sustainable and carbon neutral operations. Can you talk us through some of the reasons behind these moves and the impacts on the company, and how we as individuals can work towards influencing changes in other big industry sectors? So I'll hand over to you now, Martin. Thanks. Welcome.
That had to happen. Sorry, everyone.
Someone had to do it. So
yeah, that's right. I might as well be. I've also noticed that I've gone greener than I normally am, which is impressive also. So my apologies for that. Yeah, it's quite good. But I would like to say that it's particularly special to be along here tonight because from an Austral perspective, which is really where this started, this journey for me at least, sustainability has been at the core of that company, certainly for the past 25, if not the last 40 years. And largely it came about from a thing that Professor Gretta mentioned just before, which is self-interest, or in fact, enlightened self-interest, where Austral worked out, and this is from the directors right through to the crew on the back of the boats, that if you didn't have sustainable seafood production, nothing else was going to work. And sustainability in its widest context is really the key for all of us, for the planet and right through to the individual. For me, the journey has involved a particularly strong driving force from David Carter, the CEO of Austral, and his unfathomable drive to ensure we extend our sustainability. Personally, I believe very much in the need to have that environmental and economic sustainability, look after the people that are working with us, and build and hold community respect and trust. And those things become the key elements of really what's happened since then. So the company impacts, we were the first company in the seafood world to join with WWF and Unilever and support Marine Stewardship Council. We joined with conservation NGOs, science, government, and went to the Convention for the International Trade on Endangered Species to seek the listing of toothfish because it was under such immense threat from IUU fishing. We stopped purchase of particular fish species. We changed fishing operations. We agreed to reduce allowable catches and reduce numbers of boats, all because we could see the clear message, which is sustainability is the key. It's the core. On a more personal basis, on a more individual basis, if you like, in terms of sort of the impacts of the sustainability journey within Austral, we had David and I in particular who pretty much got out in front of all about crews and skippers and people working on the shore. And we had to pause and actually reflect, what have we done wrong? We know what we're doing. And we had to stop and actually go back and have proper dialogues to really bridge that divide so that we could understand where they were coming from and we could actually help explain, this is why we want to go carbon neutral. This is why we want to spend money doing that particular thing or whatever. Possibly the biggest, most unexpected impact was when we became fully carbon neutral. So Hannah mentioned that sort of big brother, it's everybody else's fault type thing. But in 2016, we decided we would fully offset all of our emissions using life cycle assessment. The unexpected impact at a personal level was the number of crew, the number of people that work for Austral that developed and constantly maintained this pride in being part of the first, and in fact, we are still the only seafood organisation in the world that has done that. And those changes that each individual person in our company has made have transmitted through to the conversations they have with their families, with their friends, and everywhere else. That starts to make a real difference. So you asked about influencing change in a broader sense. I moved through from, and I'm still working with Austral, but I then have become involved with a group called Seafood Business for Ocean Stewardship, which is 10 of the largest seafood businesses in the world, linked with Stockholm Resilience Centre, University of Lancaster, Stanford Centre for Ocean Solutions. And the aim there is to drive transformational change towards sustainable seafood production and healthy oceans. And a key part of that is actually climate resilience and dealing with climate change and doing what we can to promote reduction in carbon emissions, new methods of doing things, innovative approaches to find and reduce that carbon footprint that was mentioned before, but most of all, to drive towards science-based goals and limit the impact of climate change on our planet, because that's critical for everybody. It's not just the seafood business. So what are the key sort of messages or whatever in the 2 seconds that we have here to talk? I think for me, one is that the challenge that we need to put on ourselves to have open dialogues. Way too often, and it's global, it's not just Australia, it's not just Austral, it's not just Tasmania. Way too often, I watch polarised debates where people get into either side of a battle about I'm right, you're wrong. The quicker we can break through that polarisation and try and develop trust or at least understanding of other people's values and views, the quicker we'll be able to come up with solutions. We've used many examples in my time within the seafood business. I think illegal fishing for toothfish is probably the best, where we moved right away from industry peers, some of who hated us for trying to get stuff listed, right through to conservation groups, Sea Shepherd, conservation NGO gatherings, science, government, international agencies, and so forth. The whole key there was bridging the divide by talking, understanding, and then agreeing on we can't agree on everything, but we agree we're going to do this one thing really well. And we went and did it. And that is truly special. If we could all do that, that'd make a real difference. A plea then also for environmental certification. The consumer, it's the only thing I know where the individual is connected right through the seafood value chain back to the producer. That is truly transformational. Now, it doesn't mean it works, and it doesn't mean that the environmental certification system is perfect, because sometimes things that are good or great are actually a really positive thing to do. In my world, I think all the time. If we can focus, rather than tearing down things, on building them up, if we can start somewhere as a group and harness that power of working together as individuals, as companies, and as regulators, scientists, conservationists, whoever we might want to identify with, then we've got half a chance. So building trust, understanding, and commitment. Thank you. Thanks, Gretta.
Great. Thank you, Martin. I'd like to now ask all of our panelists to join me on the screen, and we'll delve a little deeper into some of those issues. And you've all raised fantastic points, and I spotted one question that I think would apply to all the areas that we've talked about tonight in one way or another. And that's a question by, if I'm doing this correctly, Rebecca Freeman, and she has asked, what do you think is a good way to communicate our sustainable choices without sounding preachy? And I actually get that question a fair bit as well, so I would be very interested in your thoughts. So we might, we'll go in the order that we presented in. So Martin Grimmer, I'll ask you to comment first on how can we communicate the importance of these choices without sounding preachy?
Thanks, Gretta. Look, thanks, Rebecca. That's a really, really good question. We do have an issue that gets picked up, particularly in social media, about virtue signalling, that people are saying they're doing good things, not because they really care about what they're doing, but they don't want to look like they're doing good things. I think, in all honesty, the main issue is authenticity. I think that what you need to do is practice what you preach. So if you want to demonstrate that you're adopting a particular type of behaviour, you do that behaviour and you do it authentically. And I think if you are honest and clear with that, then that makes a big difference rather than being forthright and as you say, preachy about it.
Yeah, excellent point. Hannah?
Yeah, just to pick up where Martin left off, really, I long ago stopped trying to preach to family and friends and general people because it didn't work. And I went, I'm just going to start doing this really deeply and consistently and shape my whole life around it. And soon enough, those people started coming back to me going, oh, I can see you're having you look like you're having a really good life. You look really happy. How do you do that thing? And how can I do that more? I want to do what you're doing. So leading by example, I think, is the most successful thing I've ever tried. And yeah, being authentic. What a wonderful point to point out, Martin. I love that. Just going, this is absolutely no virtual signaling. This is just how we live, and it feels really good. And people want to feel good in their life. They don't want to feel bad. They don't want to be part of the problem. You know, like they go, yeah, I want to have a good impact on the world. And I think showing how that can look in different contexts for different cultures, different climates is one of the most powerful things we can do. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a way that we can all be part of a solution and still have a good life. I get quite frustrated by that presentation around climate action as, you know, you can have jobs or you can have an economy or you can, you know, you can enjoy yourself with recreation or whatever, or you can't. You know, it's a very strange way of presenting the issue. Martin, what would you say around how to help communicate around these issues without sounding preachy?
I don't think I could build on what Martin Grimmer and Hannah and yourself have said. I don't, other than so strongly agree with the need for that authenticity, and it's so rare in this day and age. You know, that's what really drives me up the wall. Wouldn't it be nice if we started saying, yeah, look, I'm really sorry, I'm not perfect, but I'm working on it, and this is what I'm going to do, this and that, and you can measure it, right? So actually, in fact, I will add one then. So I go authenticity, and then I'd say accountability. That applies to the individual plus from a company perspective, right the way through.
Yeah, excellent. I'll move on to our next question then. So Cherie has asked about what's our view about the priority of individual action versus collective, or both. So that in a way ties into a lot of the points that you've all raised. What would you say, Hannah, in terms of individual versus the collective? Is it a versus? Maybe it's both.
No, I actually really don't. I don't think there's any separation. The individual is the collective, is the individual. And I think we need to change our brains a little bit to remember that actually there is no us and them, it's just us. The more we have these conversations in the open, the more that we can lead with authenticity, live with authenticity, the more we can come together through action, whether that's online or physical, at the voting booth, whatever that might be. But there is no separation between the individual and collective. Like, we just have to start acting, and the only way critical mass is developed is when we all start acting, and knowing that we don't have to wait for someone to go, okay, we're going to organise you now, and we're going to tell you what to do, and then now we're going to measure all this together. It's like, no, just start acting. And I think that's a really big thing. Don't wait, just do things, you know, do it mindfully, but do it.
And Martin G, you mentioned in your talk about that social influence, that one of the key facilitators, if you like, of why people adopted actions was seeing other people around them doing those things. And Martin E, you talked about the pride that your employees felt and the impact that then had in other parts of their life.
I think social facilitation is extremely important in a lot of areas. That if you see, it's like if you go for a fun run, it's much more fun having a fun run with others than having a fun run by yourself. The whole thing is a lot more pleasurable and interesting as a result of that, and there's a social element to that. So I think the collective action aspect is really important, because you don't just get the sum of all the individuals, you get the collective effort that goes on top of all of that as well. But that said, individual action is also important, because I think, Gretta, you've made the point that, you know, you don't have to make everyone doesn't have to make a massive change if they don't feel they're able to. You start with where you are and what you can do. And I think for some people it's individual action, and for others it's collective action.
Absolutely. If I could build a little bit on that, for me, the individual actions of the company CEOs, so I'm using the CEOs context here, so 10 largest CEOs in the globe, it's about 10 individuals. It's not about multi-billion-dollar companies, and it's about what they do and how they share that information with the others sitting around the table. And a great example I would give you there is the CEO of one of those companies sat down in front of the other 9 and said, I haven't purchased a new pair of jeans for 20 years. Where do you get your clothes? That's when you start having powerful collective conversations. They all go, oh, and we need more of that.
Yeah. Well, Hannah, you mentioned fast fashion, and Martin G, did I see a recent conversation article from you, I think, saying that people that shop at secondhand stores are actually more trendy? Is that true?
Yeah, me and my co-author Louise Grimmer, and with our wonderful honours student Freya Evans last year, did some research on what predicted people's secondhand clothes shopping. And we thought it was going to be frugality and concern for the environment. While those are important, the strongest predictor by far was style consciousness. If you felt you're a stylish person, not necessarily fashion, that's not the same as style. Style is more about identity and individualism and personality. That was by far the biggest predictor of buying secondhand clothes. So if you want to buy secondhand, you are not only saving the environment, you are also very stylish. So go and do it.
I have two teenagers that shop very frequently at secondhand stores, and I can see that it is part of their identity. They want to be different and wear things that nobody else is wearing, which I can confirm they do. So yeah,
generally, I mean, the fashion industry uses 79 trillion litres of water every year. It's extraordinary. 100 billion tonnes of waste every year. I mean, that's something we can actually make some action on that by just not engaging as excessively in that passion for just getting whatever happens to be new and then wearing it once and chucking it out.
Yeah. I'll move on to another question. So this is from Stasha, and they have asked, they'd be interested in our thoughts on how can we counter the polarising and misleading rhetoric driven by media globally. Would anyone like to tackle that rather thorny question?
Oh, gee.
I'll have a bash obliquely. I think as we've said, and in lots of different fora, it's important to do your own research. And when we say research, we don't just mean doing Google searching. We actually mean looking at evidence-based information. And that's something that I think we do get confused in the media, where they talk about do your own research, by which they mean go and look it up on the internet.
Yeah.
You need to look a bit more than that. But I think you can counter a lot of this by, with, like I said, with data. So, in terms of trying to get global organizations to pay attention, I can clearly show that people intend to buy products from environmentally friendly companies significantly more than if they don't. Now, they don't always go ahead and do it, but at least they intend to, and they consider the reputation of those companies to be much better than the non-environmentally friendly companies. It's good triple bottom line accounting using a pure business model.
Okay. I was going to say, it's such a big thorny question. I think about this most days because the media machine is wildly powerful, and coming up against that, not many people succeed to cut through that. So I think one of the biggest things that I try to encourage in my networks is critical thinking and going, don't just take what you see on face value, do your research from reputable sources. And I think also if you do have the capacity, you're in a leadership role, to use that platform, whatever that might be, to share very solid research and clear thinking around certain issues, especially the climate crisis. It's almost your responsibility, if you do have a platform and you do have good resources and networks, like you need to use that, especially right now when there's so much media mania around the election, and but also beyond that. It's not going to stop until we really start to push back on that. Yeah.
The world is full of misinformation driven not only by the media. I got to say, the media are often just the puppet for the political system or the whoever it happens to be that's driving it at the time. But you can only, or I can only reinforce exactly what's been said before and again, and hope that at some point people look at it and go, well, if that's diametrically opposite to what I thought, then I really need to go and actually check that out and understand it better. So again, it's that dialogue. It's like, oh, you make some interesting points there. I might just go away and look them up before we get really cranky and argue them against, our own beliefs or whatever.
Yeah, that challenge of misinformation and disinformation and how to help foster critical thinking in people is a really enormous challenge, I think, for many, many areas. We've got another question. There's one here from Miria, and they've asked how to bring all global organisations with similar intent and values to share, learn, collaborate, and include more people. And they've noted that small pockets of great work will not move the needle at the pace that we require. So what would you say about what's the really big thing that we need to happen to escalate a lot of these great things that are happening and really, shift them up to the next level. Might start with Martin Grimmer. Have you got something to?
It's a really good question. I'd reiterate what I said before, that it's actually good business for a start for companies to act in an environmentally friendly way, but then to collaborate. And I think this gets back to M1's point, not Excell, M2, the importance of dialogue and the importance of not taking an adversarial approach, but actually working with other people. And if it's 10 CEOs around the table, that's terrific.
Mm. And I'll just add to that maybe that often, whether you're in an NGO or a private business, there's sometimes a tendency to try to keep everything to yourself, and because you want to win everything yourself or succeed yourself. And I think a really good counter to that is to adopt the abundance mindset, where the more of us doing this thing, the better. And that can lead to great relationship building, more collaborating, and ultimately more impact in whatever you're trying to do. And that definitely needs to happen more in the climate context. So adopting that abundant mindset, the more the better.
Absolutely, the more the better. And this is a favourite passion of mine, actually. I believe it's a great question. The amount of dissipated effort from siloed, exceptionally good programs globally is a real frustration. And so where we've started to do some more work in the seafood context is creating this, and it's a terrible buzzword, I'm sorry, meta collaborations, right? So bringing together multiple groups and identifying where's the key focus, where's the one or two things we can all agree on and do really well. It becomes an overarching sort of a goal, if you like, and all of us head off and do the same thing. And that generates results. And Martin Grimmer would have studied it, I'm sure. Like I can think of multiple psychological and behavioural studies demonstrating if you can get people together, focus on one thing, do that well, then move on. What do we do right? What do we do wrong? Let's go to the next thing. But the key with those meta collaborations is not to start setting up more organisations. It's actually to harness the power of the existing ones in a network and drive ahead with a single focus, a really clear outcome in mind. And what could be a better outcome than saving the planet, quite frankly. But anyway, yeah.
All right, thanks for that. Another question here, one from Tony, and they have asked, how do we embed the concept of sustainability in our secondary and our post-secondary education curricula? Martin G, that might be a question best suited for you, maybe?
I can have a bash. Yes, absolutely. So at the university, sustainability is obviously a very big pillar in what we do, and we deliberately try and embed sustainability into various aspects of the curriculum. So we're taking a very focused approach, and I do know we have members from the sustainability unit at the university here. So part of it's awareness building, but part of it is then also assisting our students and our staff, for that matter, in knowing what to do, knowing what behaviour they can actually undertake in order to live sustainably.
Yep, and I think we've got a slide that we'll show at the end that talks about some of the public-facing offerings that are happening at the university that people might want to explore in terms of sustainability and learning more about those. I've got another question here.
Can I just add something, Gretta, to that?
Yeah, go for it.
And I have zero expertise, right, in secondary school dialogues, etc. But to me, one of the keys is to start thinking of sustainability as something that is not a separate topic. So it needs to become cross-sectoral, cross-jurisdictional, across all of the different studies that they're doing, and encourage that broader level of thinking throughout the curriculum. And I'm sure there are plenty of schools that are already doing it. But that to me seems to be a real key element when people start realizing sustainability isn't something where you employ a sustainability officer and it gets done. It's something that's visceral, that's fundamental, and goes across everything.
Yeah, and that is such a good point, Martin, I think. Because if you teach, it used to be, so I'm from a business school, it used to be we taught business ethics as a separate subject, and that kind of meant ethics was something different from everything else. And of course it's not. Ethics is a part of everyday business in the same sense that sustainability is part of everyday. Really good point.
Yeah, we're noticing the same with climate change as well. Climate change and sustainability are both becoming components of more or less everything that we do. I might just ask Corey Peterson to join very quickly, given his role in leading sustainability initiatives across the university. Welcome, Corey. Did you have anything to add to what our panelists have been talking about in terms of embedding sustainability?
Thanks for that, Greta, and thanks for having me along. Martin got it in one, I would say. It needs to be truly, well, both Martins actually need to be fully embedded across everything we have in the curriculum. So there are a number of different programs that you can actually sign up to. So for example, our College of Business and Education is becoming a prime certified business school, which is a Principles for Responsible Management education. So you are verified that you are embedding sustainability throughout everything you do. A lot of the professional courses, be it pharmacy or medicine, is embedded into professional qualifications now. So in order to get the degree, you have to actually understand climate change, its effects on health, etc. So it's all about embedding. The Australian curriculum, had that embedded for many years as well. So we found a lot of university students were expecting a little bit more, I think, than was offered even 5 years ago. And that's changing the perceptions and the expectations from the high school students and current university students. Thank you.
Right, thanks. We'll go to, I think, a very important question here that Karen has asked. She said that trusting emerging green credentials is difficult. So she's talking about ESG, or environmental, social and governance investment offsets around, sustainably sourced products. It can be really quite confusing, as a lot of you have touched on. How can people verify credentials of these products and offsets and investments? Any ideas there?
Can I leap in and start on that one? Because that really is a hot topic, right? First off, I wish somebody had said, actually, yeah, we've got some problems with some of our offsets in Australia and we need to do better. Because offsets, quite frankly, are a critical component to actually addressing very quickly climate change. And what that means is we need to have offsets in the short term that are valid, that are verifiable, that are real, that allow enough time for innovation and transformation to occur throughout industry. Because otherwise, we're not going to stop everyone flying. We're not going to stop all of the boats moving. We have to find ways to reduce the use of fossil fuels. Absolutely, we've got to stop them, But while we are still using dinosaurs to run all of our planet, we need something in between. And so let's have a dialogue about how do we get really effective, good offsets in place. And quite frankly, a lot of that work was done with the development of gold standard that came out of COP 20-something, 20, I think it might have been, which was needed to have carbon sequestration, social benefit, and biodiversity benefits, and it had to be validated. Now, if we start there, we've got half a chance. Sorry, I'll go. That was my rant.
Thanks, Martin. Hannah or Martin G?
Sure. I think the other thing is, like, when you're looking where can you offset things, it's like to find a really reputable entity, organisation, because sometimes it's been shown that actions aren't always followed through on well. So you plant the trees, but then they die next year. And so what does that even mean, So it doesn't actually, you have to really find an entity which has absolute commitment to seeing it through, whatever their initiative is. So that's my hot tip, and you can do that by asking networks and asking the entity, obviously, like, show me your track record, and just doing a bit of a vetting process before you start supporting people. Yeah.
And I guess reduce what we're buying would be using would be the first thing, and then
absolutely
the other things.
100%.
Did I cut you off then? Sorry.
I think one of the biggest things that we could, well, not the biggest thing, but one of the things we could get the government to do is have a nationally developed sustainable labelling system. We actually don't have anything. We're relying to a large extent on industry self-regulation, and that's admirable, but it's inconsistent, and it's not as easy for a consumer to understand. It's one of the big issues, like I said when I was talking earlier, about consumers not knowing what to do, is they don't know either what products are sustainably sourced, or they don't trust the credentials of certain companies, and they think it's greenwashing. So there's that term of greenwashing, is making yourself look green when you're actually not. So it'd be great if we could get something like that.
We actually do have it at least in the carbon space. So we've got the carbon. I think it's called carbon active now. It used to be carbon neutral, Australian government, but that's still going to the core of it. You still have those challenges where some of the programs within that need to be looked at. They need to be really, and people need to be reassured that they are valid, exactly as Hannah mentions.
Okay, so the clock is ticking. I could talk about these issues for hours and hours and hours, but we probably do need to go and have dinner and those kinds of things. So I'm going to ask you all one last question. An anonymous attendee has asked, or has stated, climate change concerns me deeply. They're already taking a lot of steps mentioned as an individual, but what is the one thing that they could do that would have more impact? So we'll go around. I'll ask each of you to think about, if you want, what would be the one thing that you would love everybody to leave this webinar tonight pledging that they were going to go and do, if there was only one thing? And I might start with you, Hannah.
Oh, it's so hard to say one thing, but okay, I'm going to give you one sentence. Relocalise, vote for climate safety, hold radical hope in your head and heart, and move forward, and use your imagination to dream up the future of your dreams and act accordingly. There you go.
Well, great advice. Thanks, Hannah. Martin G.
Look, I think believing you can actually make a difference, I think is important. You can actually make a difference. And I think if everyone can go away and think about what they can do that is going to have most impact. So what can you do personally that's going to have most impact, and do that?
Martin E.
I think all of the above, plus believe in the positives of humanity. I think we get sold through the media an awful lot of negatives about what we are doing as humankind. People are great. We are amazing. And so just believe in humanity and work with others to achieve great results.
All excellent points. And I would probably add that we need to really keep in mind, in terms of climate change, for example, that every fraction of a degree that we can avoid of warming really matters. So even though we hear in the media a lot about different targets, that ultimately whatever we do to reduce those impacts, to reduce those emissions, is pain and suffering avoided. And I really hope that tonight we've helped convince you that while each action we might take, and I can see my camera doing crazy things there, sorry about that, but I hope that we've convinced you that while each action we might take as individuals might feel like a little drop in the bucket, that every bucket, no matter how big, will eventually overflow with enough little drops in the bucket. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. Please join me in thanking our guests this evening, Hannah Maloney, Martin Excell, and Professor Martin Grimmer. This evening's talk will be available soon as a video and a podcast via the university's Island of Ideas website, which is now on your screens. After Easter, we'll host the second in our Future of Work series, Skills for a Changing World. It will discuss the skills and training implications of the post-COVID labour market and what this means for training and employment pathways, particularly here in our Tasmanian context. You'll be able to register for our upcoming sessions on the Island of Ideas website, or you can use the links provided in the chat box right now. The entire Island of Ideas series is also available via this site, which is now on your screens, and I would really strongly encourage you to catch up with those excellent talks. So once again, thank you very much to our three excellent speakers tonight, and for Corey for chipping in there as well. And thank you very much at home for taking part in this forum. We wish you all the very best. Good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.